Hi, everybody in FIGT land.
Hello.
We're super excited to film this short video for all of you. And to get started, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Jane.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Great to see you. And can I just say, you're in a tool shed, and how perfect that is for what we're going to be talking about today. I'm very impressed.
It is actually the only place I could find privacy, speaking from working from home, but as it turns out, the metaphor works nicely.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So thank you for introducing me. So for those of you in the FIGT community who don't know me, I'm an educational consultant at Globally Grounded, and I have a particular interest and expertise in working with students and their cross-cultural transition. My work is informed by 27 years in the education field. Every time I say that, I'm like, oh my gosh. In both international and local schools. I also have a Masters of Education, which really allowed me to study international and intercultural perspectives on education. I have parented two cross-cultural kids growing up in Southeast Asia, and was also a member of a domestically mobile family. I have been that child who has arrived at a new school 7 times, in fact, and I have been the parent who has waved goodbye to their child at the gate at a school in a foreign land. And I've also been the teacher who has welcomed cross-cultural kids into my classroom, and as a result have developed cross-cultural transition care practices that I now teach to other teachers around the world. So I love what I do. What about you, Ellen?
Well, as you know, I also moved around growing up. I'm a third culture kid, so my parents are Americans, but I grew up in Tokyo, Singapore, and Connecticut in the United States. And I was a teacher and a counselor for a while. But about 8 years ago, I started an organization called Sea Change Mentoring, and that allowed me to apply my youth mentoring expertise that I developed in the United States. It allowed me to apply it to the international world. And so I started this organization to support young people and schools to help folks have healthy relationships in their lives, manage their transitions, and develop well-being. And so these days, most of my work is with international schools, and we help them develop mentoring programs and social emotional learning programs and teacher well-being programs. Specifically. Yeah, and I'm in California right now, so in a tool shed. As it turns out.
Very appropriately in California in a tool shed. Excellent. So today, Ellen, FIGT have asked us to just give a bit of an overview of what's happening in the international school space. So many of our community are members of international schools, and there is a lot going on now. Some of it is challenging, a lot of it is really exciting, as international schools are thrown to the forefront of this whole situation because we understand about the transition, don't we? So let's fill these folks in, and let's have a conversation about what's going on in the world. And I guess the best place to start really is to provide a bit of a context. And the reality is that right now, 91% of the world's population are out of school. This varies, and this is going to vary in terms of reopening as well. So we've got schools in China, in Vietnam, in Australia, and in other countries that have begun opening. And then we've got others that are not going to open at all, and for the remainder of this school year, and looking to open at the beginning of next school year. And then others who have already said that they're not likely to reopen fully until January, as far as we know. And one thing we have learned through this COVID-19 situation is that flexibility and fluidity is key to all of this. A decision can be made one day and then it needs to be changed the next day. So that's the context we're working with.
Yeah, and then in the international school world, you know, as Jane was saying, we've got the sort of some schools opening, some schools opening later. We've got, for those that are reopening either now or in the fall, you've got folks planning on having a staggered start. Some folks are doing a rotating schedule. So maybe all the kids with last names in the alphabet from A to D go to school on Monday, and then the next set go on Tuesday, or one grade gets to go on a certain day, or they do mornings and afternoons and not full school days, so that they can manage the social distancing. So that's sort of logistically what we're kind of seeing being planned right now, or in the works right now. But on the sort of the human side of things, we are seeing teachers really stressed out. And for me, I'm probably, it's the group in society, it's one of the groups that I'm most concerned about right now. They had to really hustle to transfer their learning online, as you all know, and then they started off, a lot of folks thought it was a sprint, and then that sprint turned into a marathon without any kind of a break. And now we're looking at a lot of teachers that are expected to work this summer. A lot of teachers go, if they're foreign teachers, they will go back to their home country for the summertime and regroup and see extended family. And a lot of folks are not going to be able to do that this year. So we're seeing some real strains on mental health and well-being and stress. We're seeing changing family dynamics. Some are challenging and some are really positive. So on the challenging side, you might see parents who are feeling a little less effective than they would like to right now, because they're also co-teaching some of the online learning components. Maybe they've had help raising their kids with the IEs or nannies, and now they're doing all of that and their jobs, and it's just a new thing for them. Also for some folks, relationships are strained. On the other hand, there are a lot of families reporting that they are feeling much more close, and they're getting more quality time. I mean, Jane, isn't that happening for you and your family?
Absolutely. Yes, it's been a very special time, and I'm sure that it's all helped by the fact that we've lived abroad together before and had to rely on each other with no support network around us. So that has certainly been our experience. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we're seeing on the family dynamic side. And then, the big pieces, I mean, this pandemic has really amplified maybe what we've already known. And it seems like this emphasis on the importance of relationships and mental health it's really come to the forefront right now because of this pandemic. And so I think we both think that's a good thing, that at least now we're really focused on it. And we're hoping that people will remember this when we get back to a little more normalcy, a sense of normalcy. But one of the themes that we talked about for today was thinking about, all right, what's prepared us for supporting international schools and for supporting families and students right now, and what gets us through this strange time. And Jane and I both talked about how our experience at FIGT in this community, and all of the reading and training and supports that we've done around transitions and getting to know our own stories has really equipped us to manage. And it made us think of a story. Mona Stewart, a member of the FIGT community, who's also a board member on SPAN and an international school educator, and known for her wisdom and graciousness. And she was talking to another friend of ours who had to leave Indonesia very quickly with her whole family. And she said to our friend, you know what? This is what you trained for. You've got this. And we keep going back to that thought, you know what? This is what we've trained for. This is what we've trained for. Thanks to the Pollocks, both father and son, to Doug Oda, to Ruth Van Raken, to Tina Quick, to Lois Bouchon, all these, Ann Cottrell, I mean, all these wonderful, and Ann Copeland. There's all these wonderful people that have, taught us how to kind of manage these transitions. And oh my gosh, are there so many transitions with this pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the tool that we really want to focus on today has proven to be reliable and effective for generations of the culture kids since was first written about in 1999, and that is the raft. But don't switch off now. Don't think, oh, well, I already know all about this. I don't want to. I don't need to hear this, because we feel that the great thing about the raft is that although it was originally designed for TCKs moving from one location to another, it is actually an excellent tool for all of life's transitions, including the transitions associated with a global pandemic. So just to quickly give you a refresher of the raft, reconciliation, it's about, well, firstly, let me remind you that the raft is an acronym for really helping our community to get from one place to the next place. And let's face it, that's what we're dealing with right now, isn't it, in the global pandemic? So R stands for reconciliation, and that's all about forgiving and being forgiven, making things right. A stands for affirmation, and that's all about appreciation and taking the time to thank the people, the places, the possessions, the perspectives that you have enjoyed during your time in the location. F stands for farewells. So really marking the occasion, saying goodbye to those people, those places, those possessions. And this is probably the most challenging element to complete during this pandemic for people who have had to leave suddenly, which has happened so often. And then the T, of course, stands for think destination. And that's about researching, planning, and visualizing the new destination and the new people. And we are talking about location, but we're actually talking about so much more than that during this global pandemic. Don't you think, Ellen? Oh.
Sorry, I was on mute because there's children running around in the back. No, I was just agreeing with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah, yes. So we've decided that we're going to talk about the 3 key communities within a school community, international school community. And these are the arrivers, the stayers, and the leavers. And we're going to share with you what we've been seeing and what to expect, and then also using the raft to help us work through the challenges that we see, and also the positives as well. So firstly, let's talk about the arrivers. It's such a time of uncertainty, this whole COVID-19, and I'm often reminded of Michael Miller's quote where he says, our brains would rather know that something bad is going to happen to us than a state of uncertainty. And even people who usually navigate change quite well may find themselves reacting differently in times of deep uncertainty as we have right now in the world, starting to feel lost, hopeless, and anxious. And that is definitely something that we are seeing in international schools right now. And the uncertainty, plans of moving to new destinations and starting school in the fall have all just been thrown into such chaos. And that is disarming even for people who are used to navigating change. What we are seeing in international schools is them surveying students and faculty prior to their return, just so that they can have a bit of an idea of what these students and staff have been dealing with, how they're feeling, and how they can put support mechanisms in place for these students. And as Ella mentioned before, we're seeing staggered starts, we're seeing some schools doing online part of the time and face-to-face part of the time. So that's quite challenging for faculty, but it's also equally disarming for students because there's that lack of consistency. We are also seeing for arrivers, a lot of schools have turned their new student orientation online, which is fantastic to be able to provide that. And of course, in amongst all of this, admissions play an absolutely vital role. They've always been incredibly important, but now more so. And some admissions staff members have been telling me that they are finding themselves in more of a counselling role as they're working with families during this time of uncertainty, not knowing when they're going to be able to be on the ground or returning, because we'll talk about it a bit more later, but arrivers are not just new people coming into the school in the international context during COVID-19. So some of the things that admissions teams are doing are creating virtual tours around their school. And instead of asking students to write an essay on their favorite topic so that they can get an understanding, schools can get an understanding of the writing and their language and so on, they're actually asking them to write more about their emotional well-being in regard to transition, just so that they can implement effective support mechanisms, as well as understand how they read and write and comprehend as well. So there's a lot of great stuff going on in amongst the challenges associated with the arriving community.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're thinking about that raft, then the thinking destination is the, we were thinking that admissions in particular plays a great role in helping families think about that destination. So through those virtual tours, through finding out the stories of that the families are bringing into the school year and the beginning of the school year is really critical. So moving on, when we're thinking about the stayers, Jane's going to tell us a little bit about stayers, but I thought this might be interesting for folks to hear. I mean, there's a school I work with in China where 70% of their student body never left China. Now, because they're Chinese, so they're Chinese students going to international schools. Now, they may have left their city to go stay with relatives, but they never left China. And most of them stayed in the city while 70% of the faculty left the country. And so that made me think about stayers and what is it going to be like when everyone does come back in the school year, when there's going to be, I mean, the metaphor I really like that I've been hearing a lot lately is that there's, we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats. So I think as always, it's easy to focus on the leavers and the arrivers, and it's really easy to overlook the stayers. And the stayers have some pretty powerful stories this time around. So important to think about. So Jane, tell us a little bit about what we've seen with stayers, and then just, how does the raft connect to how we can support with stayers?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Ellen. What we are seeing is that stayers are often the missing link. They're the forgotten ones. And you would recall from our research that we definitely found that in terms of transition programs within international schools, stayers were the ones that tended to not be supported. And even just last week, actually, in the SPAN Nest, they were talking about stayers, and this was also exemplified in that suddenly schools were thinking, oh my goodness, we've been thinking about the leavers and we've been thinking about the arrivers, but what about the stayers? And the interesting thing that came up out of it was that the stayers have also suddenly become leavers, and so they will become arrivers. So the staff the faculty that you just mentioned, Ellen, are a perfect example of that. They are stayers, but they've had to leave, and so they will be arrivers as well. So there's a whole new challenge associated with that, and stayers are often the local ones, as exemplified in your story that you were just telling us about from the school in China. And so there is a bit of a risk of resentment associated with that. And as we mentioned before, there's the challenge associated with kids who previously haven't had any behavioural issues, that it may be exemplified this time around when schools come back together, and the ones who were troubled are really in quite serious need. I'm reminded when it comes to stayers of an article I wrote way back in 2016 where I talked about stayers being the centre of a revolving door. They are the stabilisers as the arrivers and the leavers come around and around. And this is even more so the case in this scenario. So what can we do? Using the RAFT acronym, we firstly really need to identify who the stayers are in our school communities. It is not as straightforward as simply the people who stayed on the ground. And this is such a challenging time. And to some extent, we're all in transition, in one way or another, but we really do need to identify the stayers. And if we're thinking about the RAFT, I think a great thing that we really need to do is to affirm and validate the experiences and the associated emotions for our stayers, and really think about what we as schools are doing to care for them. You know, how are you equipping them to understand and also effectively fulfill their pivotal role in the goodbyes and the hellos in an international community? So Ellen, can you tell us a little bit about the leavers?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I do, I have to say one other thing about, you just made me think of something, that there's a couple of schools that I'm working with that when everyone comes back to school campus next school year, there's going to be a big wall of gratitude for the community staff that stayed. So the janitorial staff, security, everyone that kept their buildings safe and clean and ready for them. And folks that we, unfortunately often overlook. So it's another nice way of affirming the other stayers in our community. Yeah,
absolutely.
So for leavers,
that's wonderful.
I know, it's so sweet. I love it. I can't wait to see it. Yeah, but for leavers, we're seeing a lot of people that have had to leave unplanned and unexpectedly, and some folks are not going to come back to the country that they were living in, or they don't know when they'll be able to come back because of changing laws, international laws about crossing borders and that sort of thing. So, so there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unplanned, unexpected goodbyes. People left for vacation with a suitcase filled with bathing suits, and then couldn't get back into the country they were living in, and then had to adjust to, winters in Vermont. So it's been pretty crazy. So we're seeing a lot of lack of closure. I've seen with students right now, a lot of emotional distancing, which is typical. We know from our training on transitions that it's typical for many kids to kind of distance themselves when they anticipate goodbyes. But because we're not in a physical space together, it makes it much more easy to emotionally distance when we are expected to be physically distant as well. And it's much harder for teachers and counselors and mentors to pull those students back and to get them incentivized to come back online and reconnect with their friends before they say the official goodbye. So for strategies, we talked about our reconciliation and maybe not so much when Jane and I were talking, it wasn't necessarily saying sorry, although that's always a good thing too, if you have someone that you need to say sorry to, but just more about understanding that we've all been experiencing these, our own pandemic experiences. And before we say our official goodbyes, we felt that it would be a good idea to give students the opportunity to tell their stories about what this has been like and what it was like to leave unexpectedly. And certainly if they're not going to return to school campus next year, what that feels like for them. And for their colleagues and their peer students to actively listen to those stories. And just that act of listening and making sense of it all will tie up some loose ends and start the healing process. And then farewell, that's the goodbye. Don't forget to say goodbye. So that's the F in the RAFT acronym. And then, there's a lot of creative ways that schools have been saying goodbye to their graduates, for example, with sending them caps and gowns through the mail, and then having kids take their pictures at home. Actually, there's an international school teacher in Singapore who just created this app called Sign Your Book, I think, and signyourbook.org, I think is what it's called. Yeah. And people get to sign digitally yearbooks, and then it can be printed out, so they actually have something tangible to hold. And I love it.
That's a fantastic idea.
I know, and I love that it was designed by an international school teacher who was really concerned about the graduating class. So there's some really cool ideas there of saying goodbye, creative and otherwise.
Definitely. Yes, I completely agree. Just going back to what you were saying about the storytelling and the active listening, when I've been speaking with my colleagues in Taiwan who have returned to school, they're a step ahead of the majority of the world. This was one element that they decided to include in their arriving process, that to allow the storytelling and the active listening so that students could really gain perspective of each other's experiences during this pandemic, and the students have been saying how fantastic that was and how they appreciated having the time to tell their story, but B, having the time to listen to other stories so that they could really come alongside students and understand where they're at and move forward together. So it's a really worthwhile activity to prioritise in the days, weeks and months ahead. So that's great. So if we bring this all together, there's a lot of challenges, but there's a lot of great things happening. And one of the greatest joys for me, and I know Ellen, you and I have spoken about this too much, is what we've seen in the sharing across schools, across the globe. And interestingly, international schools are now the leaders, and they have been magnificent at sharing resources, sharing knowledge with local schools as well as other international schools, and are really leading the way and raft building around the world. So that's been so exciting. We've seen such things as the Global Educators Collective, a Facebook group, which I know you Ellen interviewed the founder of that on your podcast, and it was so great. It just goes to show the power of the global network. And I've had the privilege of introducing local school counsellors to leaders and leaders to my international school colleagues. So that's just, bridging such huge gaps there. And the unity amongst the education world has just been a delight to also be a part of. I mean, Ellen, you've done some amazing work with your podcast and your Teachers Wellbeing ebook, which I've certainly shared across all the local schools that I work with here in Australia. And then, we've done webinars, and I've done quite a few webinars for local schools trying to support their overseas students. So there's been so many things that we've been doing as a educator collective, and that is such a joy, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It goes back to what Mona said, that, we've got this, this is what we've trained for. And it feels good to be able to give back after, we have been nurtured by these great minds in the FIGT community. So it's been pretty special.
Yeah, and I think it's just also a reminder, because you can, when you're working in these, across cultures, you can kind of think that everybody knows about the raft, everybody knows about transitions, but actually they don't. In the wider world, they don't. So we really are in quite a privileged position to be able to share our knowledge with the rest of the world. So I was just thinking about, you and I have been talking about, where other places where we've found joy. Finding joy in unexpected places is the theme for FIGT this month. And so we've certainly found joy in so many different areas. For example, in Western education, creative thinking and problem solving are highly valued, and all of a sudden schools have had to step up to really role model these skills. And it's really resulted in some incredible innovation and reimagining, particularly with regard to digital technology. As Ellen mentioned before, the emotional well-being and relationships becoming front and centre, which is fantastic. Long may that last. And as many of us find ourselves at home, we've been reminded of the strength and joy that comes from those authentic relationships, and making time to support our emotional well-being. And I'm hoping that will provide a real empathy that then generates within schools how relationships and emotional well-being do need to remain there front and centre. So we it's been so great to be able to share these ideas together today, Ellen, and that you are in the tool shed is just perfect because it's just a constant visual reminder, as we've been saying the whole time, is that this is what we've trained for. Thank you, Mona Stewart. We have the tools, don't we, to navigate this extraordinary season.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I have this vision in my mind of all of these members of the FIGT community out there on all over the world, build, as carpenters, building rafts for other people. And just that visual, it makes me smile. Speaking of joy, I mean, that just gives me joy. So
Absolutely. Yes, definitely. And it doesn't mean that we aren't going to go through the challenges. I mean, this is an unbelievably challenging time, but it is so reassuring that we do have the tools. And so that helps us to put one step in front of another and then, yes, get to that place of contentment, isn't it? So,
absolutely.
Yes, we are very privileged. So huge thank you to the FIGT community, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone. And thanks for listening. Yeah. And we miss you and we're grateful for you. And we'll see you next time.
Yes. Take care. Stay well.
Bye, everybody. Okay.